All right, welcome everybody to our pet talk this evening. I'm really excited to have Cheryl Nolan here to speak to you about housing laws and how they apply to pets. And she is an expert in that field. So you guys are going to get an opportunity to learn a lot this evening. Before we get started, I'll just go over some of the details of the setup. So I am recording this lecture and I will send out a link to the recording at the end, along with any handouts and also the PowerPoint slides so that you can see all the different resources and information that Cheryl has to share with you. And we will be able to ask questions either through by unmuting yourself or through the chat. So whichever you're most comfortable with, you're welcome to have your camera on or off throughout the presentation. We just ask that you do mute yourself if you are not speaking. So if you don't have a question, keep yourself on mute, please. And then you're welcome to unmute if you have a question, and feel free to ask that throughout the presentation. It does not need to be at the end or at certain points, so you're welcome to ask throughout. So before we get started, I always like to share a little bit about some things coming up with San Diego Humane Society. So I'm going to share my screen with you, and I hope everybody can see right now. Are you guys able to see that? Okay, great. So if you could visit our website, sdhumane.org/events, that is a great way to see just some great upcoming programs that we have. And so if you scroll down here, we have some fundraising ones, and then here are our community engagement events. So on Saturday, we have a really great Wake Up with Wildlife. It will be Project Coyote speaking, and they're going to talk about coexisting with coyotes. So I think that will be really informative if anyone has attended one of our Wake Up with Wildlife lectures before. They're always on really unique topics. So feel free to attend that if you'd like. And then our next lecture coming up is our behavior and training lecture, which is going to be about introducing pets to each other. So whether you have pets that are different species or two of the same, and you get a new pet and bring them home, this is a great opportunity to learn how to help them to coexist peacefully with each other. Lots of coexisting topics today. And then grooming for your pet. We have a staff member who's going to walk us through grooming tips at home for you. So that will be a lot of great stuff coming up in May. And I'll send links to all of those so that you can register straight from my email if that's easiest for you. And then I always like to share an animal that's available for adoption. And this evening, I'm highlighting Little Girl, who is really beautiful. She's a senior, she's 13 years young, and she has this beautiful long hair, and apparently she came in with some matted hair, so they did have to shave some of it, and now she enjoys wearing sweaters. So if that's something that you would like to do with your pet, this could be the perfect pet for you. So I will also include a link to Little Girl's page here so that you can help us spread the word about her, or if you're interested in her yourself, you would always be welcome to click on the link and fill out the adoption information. Okay, so we are back to the regular screen, and I'm going to hand it off to Cheryl, who is going to guide you through a wonderful presentation. Again, feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions at any point throughout the lecture. And thank you so much, everyone, for attending.
Oh, give me 1 second, sorry. Okay, so thank you all for being here. I'm really excited to be presenting this webinar to you tonight on understanding pet laws in the housing arena, or understanding housing laws for pets. This is the first time that I have focused in this closely on housing laws, and I'm excited to do that because this is hands down one of the top most asked areas that come into my practice. My practice focuses just on animal law, and I will explain a little bit about what animal law entails and what an animal law attorney does. but when I was first asked to do this presentation, I thought this is a long time coming. This is what I want all of my clients to have undertaken and heard before coming to me. And so hopefully I can answer some questions with you today. As we said at the beginning, please feel free to post questions in the chat or unmute yourself and ask questions. I want to be able to tailor this to your specific concerns, and if I can untangle any issues for you, I'm more than welcome, more than happy to do that for you tonight. So don't hesitate to do that. And then at the end of the presentation, I have some resources for you, and afterwards I also have some handouts that I'm going to share that we will distribute to you after today. So like I said, I will tailor that to the questions that I receive, and I'll add handouts as they address your questions. Okay, so is pet law a thing? I add this as a slide in all of my presentations because this is the #1 question that I get from lawyers, non-lawyers, family members, good friends of mine. It really doesn't matter. Anybody who finds out that I practice animal law or wants to know how my practice is going or my cases are going always ask me, is pet law a thing? And yes, it is. It is a huge thing. And I just put the definition in there for yourself, just to kind of help simplify it for you. Animal law, pet law is really the same as any other area of law, but that the facts generate or center on, or the dispute centers on the animal. So it might be an ownership dispute. It might be a dispute about lost and found. It might be a dispute about whose dog started a fight. It could be anything. And in this, as we're going to talk about today, it's going to be focusing on how we interact with our access to housing, whether we're renters, whether we're property owners, landlords. Pet law in the housing arena is all of the issues of housing that center on ownership of an animal. So the #2 question I always get is, how did you get into animal law? How did you decide to practice animal law? Many different variations on that question. And, you know, at the end of the day, I think it really comes down to the answer is sometimes it's just destiny. I did not begin my career as a lawyer practicing animal law, and I never thought I would get into this. As you can see from these pictures, these are pictures from my youth. I grew up with a mother who was a dog obedience instructor, and she began her school here in San Diego when I was 5 years old. So you see a picture of me up in the top left corner, and I am teaching these Irish setter puppies how to learn to eat on their own. We're whelping the puppies there. There's a picture of me in the middle where I'm showing a dog. So our family was really big into dog shows. There's pictures on the bottom of my mother and a really good friend of ours in an obedience trial. You see a copy of her very first business card. And in the top right corner is a picture I'm pretty proud of, because that is my mother teaching a class in elementary school, teaching the kids how to properly care for their dogs. And that's me in the corner watching her present. And here I am doing almost a very similar thing, except I'm not teaching you how to take care of your dogs. So sometimes it's just destiny. Okay, so what I want to do is give you a little bit of a primer of what are some of the basics of animal law in the housing world. Again, to open your mind and see how the housing law in the animal world can be impacted in many different aspects of our ownership of our pets. So it comes into play with whether or not we have our vaccinations up to date, or whether our dogs are spayed or neutered or altered. It also comes into whether our animals are properly licensed and microchipped. I'm going to go into more detail on this slide, but I just kind of want to run down this for you. Leash law, dogs being off leash, or allegations of whether a dog has bit somebody or bit another dog, always comes up in housing cases. Breed restrictions, no surprise there. A lot of property owners have concerns about specific breeds, and that in and of itself is its own entire area of law that attorneys just focus on in and of itself. Veterinary licensing and dog Hipaa. This less so in the housing area, but it does come into play when we're talking about whether our pets are properly vaccinated or spayed or neutered. A lot of times property owners will ask for our veterinary records, and many people are surprised to learn that there is such a thing as a Hipaa law for our pets. I call it dog Hipaa, that's Cheryl's shorthand, but really what it is just like with humans and the Hipaa regulations that govern privacy over our medical records, our animals have the same with the veterinarians. And so that does impact whether or not a particular property owner or landlord, or even just another third party, can access our animals, our pets' veterinary records. Code enforcement and abatement is a fancy legal way of saying dogs that make too much noise, dogs that cause some kind of a nuisance in the neighborhood. Abatement and enforcement also deals with noise issues with construction, where construction workers may come in too early in the morning or work too late at night. That is the area of law that focuses on, our ownership of our animals and whether it is a nuisance to the people that live around us. And then finally, land use planning and commercial use building permits. That I should have also included there are kennel permits and permits to have more than a certain number of dogs or cats. That is part of the body of local and state ordinances that govern how we own our animals that we own, how we can possess them, and what are the structures within which we own them. And again, all of these come into play when we interact with, as a property owner, when we interact with our tenants, as a tenant, when we're interacting with our landlord, property manager, or property owner. So just to kind of also flesh out a little bit more for you on this slide, a couple other examples of when it comes into play. This is, again, probably one of the top number 1 or 2 requests that I get, which is if my client is the property owner, they'll say, my tenant is requesting an emotional support animal, and I think they're making it up. What can I request from them to document that? One of the things that you can request as a property owner at any point, even for pets, is proof of vaccination and proof that the pet is in good health. So having the vaccination records up to date and having spay and neuter records available to show, it will take you far. Also, licensing and microchipping can go far to identify which pet belongs to which tenant. And there again, when I had mentioned earlier about pet Hipaa, some tenants think it's okay that it will suffice to just provide the name and number of the veterinarian and say, yeah, you can just call my vet and get what you need. And this often causes a lot of frustration and confusion because veterinarians only have the privacy or the confidentiality relationship with the individual that brought the animal into their clinic. So again, when you're dealing with a housing provider or in the housing context, what is optimal is to have those records ready, available, and up to date so that you're not faced with having to run around and worry about whether the license is expired or not, and worry about whether you have all the records that you need to either prove to the landlord that your cat is in good health, or vice versa, property owner, you're not being sent all these other different directions trying to find information that you just aren't able to find. So as I go through the rest of the slides tonight, I'll bounce back to some of these ordinances because they are the underpinnings of what will support a lot of our needs to live with our animals and support and promote having animals in our lives. Okay, so this slide is a few things that keep landlords up at night and how to put them to bed. So this is like literally a top 10 list of issues that come to me for my clients who are property owners, homeowners, with these are concerns that have actually been lodged to me. And what do I do about this? How can I deal with this? Barking dogs and aggressive dogs usually come in together. Sometimes property owners will make an observation about whether a dog is aggressive based on the fact that they bark excessively. So what I do, because of my background in the animal world, I try to unpack that and maybe give them some guidance on how to really ascertain what they're dealing with. Too many pets is another big question that comes up, as well as odor. This might be because of complaints that are coming from neighbors lodged to the property owner. And again, those really can veer into the nuisance and abatement issues, especially if they have received proper notice and the pet owners are just ignoring it or haven't taken remedial actions. Off-leash pets is a problem. I mean, I don't have the time to do it, but I do watch the next door posts in my community, and I will tell you that off-leash pets is up there probably number 2 to people who don't pick up after their pets. Everybody posts about all the people who don't pick up after their pets and people who leave their pets off leash. You know, there are a lot of legal problems that come about with people leaving their dogs off leash. And, you know, today is just about housing problems. So I'm not going to get into that unless I get a specific question. But suffice it to say, you know, pets off leash and not cleaning up after our pets, really, it causes so much consternation that I think there again, an attorney could just build an entire practice around that. Pets in the swimming pool. So now this is, number 7 is something that I received from feedback I requested from another attorney. And it surprised me because I have been a renter in a complex with a pool. And I remember that at the end of the summer season, they did allow us to have one night where we could bring all of our, it's really dogs. I never saw anybody bring a cat into the pool, but where we could bring all of our dogs and have a swimming pool dog happy hour. And I just thought it was the coolest thing in the world. Prior to that, I had never seen anyone try to bring a dog into the swimming pool, but maybe things have changed in the last couple of years. Suffice it to say, there is a lot of movement that's happening in the last couple of years with people bringing their dogs and I guess rabbits, I've seen rabbits too, bringing dogs and pets around with them more and accessing public amenities that are also accessed by people who may not be pet friendly. Okay, and number 8, I really should have put number 8 as number 1. None of these are in order of importance, but number 8, hands down, without question, is the number 1 thing that keeps landlords up at night. And I'm going to talk about how to help put them to bed. And if there are any landlords in this group, please know that this is an unbiased presentation. I say this with no judgment. I say this with sympathy for both sides. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about how I have this sympathy and my understanding of it. But bottom line, anyone who has an emotional support animal can probably attest to the frustration that they have probably experienced just having a communication around whether or not they're entitled to an emotional support animal and what documentation is required. Likewise, service animals. Service animals, what is the difference between that? Keeps landlords up at night. And then the last 2, tenants with non-domesticated animals. I confess I rarely get clients with issues about non-domesticated animals, but I have had a couple. So I have, I've had a fish case and I've had an iguana case, but it's the minor, it's the minority or not the majority of the situation. And then finally, complaints about pets left on the balcony or tethered in common areas. This is a big one in planned communities or apartment complexes. A lot of people will do this. I don't know what it has been like in the last year because of COVID, but I will say prior to COVID, this is a common complaint from neighbors. People go to work and they might think that the balcony is big enough for their small dog and they'll leave the dog out on the balcony. There's probably some frass, which is fake grass, water, hopefully water and food. But nonetheless, that is not a good practice, both for the animal and it's not good for your neighbors, but it does cause a lot of problems for landlords. Okay, so I put in the title, how to put them to bed. We're gonna talk about that in the next few slides. Okay, let's bite this part off. Emotional support animal, therapy, assistance, and service dogs. And I added, and mini horses. I say bite this off, it's really let's rip off the Band-Aid. This is the biggest, most frustrating area of law for property owners and tenants who own service animals and emotional support animals. On both sides, I get the same level of frustration, the same level of confusion, and the same level of passion about their position. It is my personal goal as an animal law attorney to help educate both sides. If I, after my time of representing a client, if I have brought some resolution and some understanding to the fore, then I feel like I've really gone far to do my job. So here's some questions. What's the difference? What's the big difference between emotional support, therapy dog, therapy animal, assistance animal, comfort animal? I didn't add that, but that's another term that is used, and service animals. What is the big difference? Well, to make it as simplistic as possible, the big difference is about $15,000 of training plus 200 and plus hours of total training, costing about $15,000 plus a certification plus ongoing refresher training. That is the difference between a service animal that is trained to perform a task to address a disability need for somebody and a comfort animal or emotional support. Now, do you have to spend $15,000? No. Do you, oops, sorry, let me go back. I thought I saw something in the chat, so I was trying to. Okay, so do you have to spend $15,000? No. Do you have to spend 200 and plus hours of training? No. Do you need to do refresher training? No. But at the very core of it, if I'm making it simple, that is one of the easiest ways to tell the difference between emotional support and service dogs, or therapy and service horses, or assistance. So the next question is, no, really, Cheryl, what gives? Can I deny a tenant's request for an emotional support dog if the lease prohibits pets? I assure you, this is how the questions go. And the answer is, you cannot deny a request even for an emotional support animal, even if your lease prohibits pets. You can't deny it. You can't deny it if the request was made in writing or verbal, whether it was made after move-in or midterm. If they said they got the pet, I'm sorry, I misspoke. By the way, emotional support animals are not pets, so that's a key difference as well. If they report to the property owner that they obtained the emotional support animal mid-lease, that is not grounds for denial. Okay, so that's simplistic. It obviously gets a lot more complicated than that. In your handouts I'm going to provide for you, it's about 8 pages. It's guidance that was issued by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. It was issued over a year ago, and that was their attempt to clarify for housing providers how to decide how to handle each request between emotional support, comfort, assistance, service animal, you know, whatever. It was their attempt, and yet they, that 8-page document is still complicated, and I find that I am still translating that document for clients. Just the same though, I'm going to provide it to you, and I just say give yourself time when you go through it. Okay, and then the last question I get is, what about proof? What can I ask for proof? Okay, a landlord can ask for a letter from a medical provider linking that animal to the disability, but only if, so the landlord can only ask if the disability is non-obvious, which is the term that HUD uses, non-obvious, but essentially you can only, the landlord, or if you are the landlord, you can only ask if that disability is non-obvious. Examples of non-obvious disabilities are PTSD, seizures, diabetes. There's many different valid disabilities that impair an individual's ability to access housing and to enjoy the full activities of daily living without an emotional support animal or a therapy animal or an assistance animal or a service animal. So that said, if it's not obvious, not apparent, the landlord can ask, and yet those questions they can ask are very limited. The handout I'm going to provide to you gives those questions. And I will say that is a strength of that, the HUD guidance. They did give it, like it's called FAQs, frequently asked questions. And the frequently asked questions do go down in a checklist format that tell you, ask this. If yes, go to question 6. If no, go to question 4. So in that respect, it is a lot farther than the Americans with Disabilities Act ever did for us. So fraudulent service dogs, most people are not familiar with this, and this is an underutilized aspect of our penal code. Every state in the United States now has some kind of penal code that addresses fraudulent reporting of a service dog. This is very specific to somebody holding out a dog as being trained and certified to perform specific tasks tied to their disability. The reality is that the penal code is rarely enforced. There's many reasons why. Some of the reasons have to do with the fact that it's a difficult crime to enforce. Some of it has to do with the fact that our law enforcement is already overburdened with far higher priorities. So I share it though, because I think that everybody on all sides should be aware that this is one attempt to address what has been happening with a lot of people who, and this is something we're hearing from the disability community, from service dog handlers. There's a lot of people out there who are holding animals out as service animals, and it's questionable. The questionableness of those animals has caused a lot of other problems. There have been reports of service dog handlers, so an individual in a wheelchair, for example, or a person who is visually impaired, who is in an elevator, and another dog or another animal dog that is wearing a vest and held out as a service dog comes in and then attacks the service dog with the handler in the wheelchair. This happens a lot. This has been a frequent happening. I have spoke to a few handlers that have told me this happened to them. Now, I wasn't there, so I can't explain, what all the details of what it looked like and how it happened, how that all came about. But I can tell you this, that it has become such an issue that the disability community has begun to lobby our federal government for better guidelines on limitations and allowances for service dogs and emotional support animals. And as a side note, this doesn't impact the housing world, but in the transportation world, we recently saw that emotional support animals they're now restricted from flights. So that actually came about because many dogs were brought onto flights, and specifically in 3 instances that I'm aware of, dogs were brought onto flights and presented as emotional support or service dogs. And then they, as boarding was happening, attacked individual passengers. And so it's just an example of where, I think we can all agree that the emotional support world and service dog world has gotten out of control. And that's just, I can just say that just from, any of us can say that just from going into stores or restaurants. A lot of us have been cooped up for the last year, so maybe we don't see it as much, but I do suspect that once we're all vaccinated and getting out, we're going to see more of it. Okay, so enough about that. But what I can say is it has had an impact on our service dog handlers. It has had an impact on the public perception of whether individuals who have non-obvious disabilities are entitled to the animal that they have with them, which is extremely unfortunate. to be that individual person who is in fact entitled to that assistance animal and experience the side glances and the comments under breath when it really shouldn't be that way. So there again, this is addressed in the HUD FAQs, which you'll have in your handouts, and I have provided for you the California Penal Code. Other than that, you know, this is a low priority area of enforcement, but who knows what will happen in the future. Okay, another thing that I really want to bring to your attention, because it crosses over into the housing world, is the effect or the extent to which abuse and neglect of our animals broaches over into our housing rights. Like I had said earlier, it comes up when we have complaints about tethering. There are, in California, we have ordinances and laws against tethering our animals, against or prohibiting providing them ample water and food, especially during the summer months. We have all the states have hot car laws. So again, leaving animals in a parked car, even in the parking lot where you live, can be deemed under the circumstances as a violation of the hot car law. And everyone should know that in addition to our hot car laws, we have Good Samaritan defenses. That means that if a neighbor sees your dog in a car and it's hot outside and your dog looks like it's in distress, or just a passerby sees a cat in a car and believes the cat is in distress, they will have a Good Samaritan defense to break the window and help that animal, save that animal and resuscitate it if necessary. Okay, so that's the area of care. Crime victims. So we also see in the abuse and neglect area, there is a lot of focus now being provided to supporting crime victims with their pets. A lot of this comes from our understanding of the link. There's several studies that have been done across the US, and there's one from Australia and in Europe that have documented the link between domestic violence and violent crimes to individuals who also neglect and abuse animals. Oftentimes you'll hear it said that people who who are domestic violence abusers began as abusers of animals, or they may say an individual who committed a violent crime began with violent crimes against animals. That link and those studies are also what have supported new ordinances and regulations that allow us to bring our pets into other housing arrangements in times of emergency where we ordinarily would not have that allowance. For example, many domestic violence shelters and many homeless shelters are now allowing pets. And also we are seeing many nonprofit organizations and organizations of veterinarians, as well as the Humane Society is doing it, providing a lot of resources to individuals in shelters and in homeless shelters, as well as our homeless population, to allow individuals to keep pets in their lives. Often that is the final link of stability, and that is what keeps them feeling hopeful about the future. And I just couldn't imagine anyways, just going through all that crisis and not having one of my pets. Anyways, I digress. Just know that in this world and in this particular drill down of the law, there are movements that are being made to allow pets to continue to live with us as almost in continuity like they did before. Okay. Another exciting area that is developing in the abuse and neglect world is access to justice for canine victims, also known as guardian ad litem. In non-legal words, it's like these are attorneys who volunteer to the court and represent the interests of the animal in an abuse and neglect case. This would come up in the housing world if a property owner, for example, had reported somebody for abandoning animals at the home, tethering them up to trees and leaving the house and moving out, and then reported them to law enforcement. And then fast forward, they're in a criminal proceeding or they're in an abuse and neglect proceeding. And the issue is what's in the best interest of the animal, and how did this particular crime impact the animal? So this is a minority of states, of course, but we're making great headway. Connecticut has Desmond's Law. New Jersey, I wish I knew the name of the dog. It is named after a dog, and New Jersey's legislation is underway. And in California, we have Riley's Law. These laws are named after an individual dog that faced extreme and horrific abuse. And AB 2645 is co-sponsored by the Animal Legal Defense Fund, and I am waiting with bated breath for its passage. I'm very excited about what it means for attorneys having an opportunity to be of service and volunteer to our courts, and also to be of service for our animals. So again, you know, to go back to the housing world, how does this come into play? It's a big drill down, but I think it's something that we should all know about, because for me, when I read the posts on Nextdoor, and there's one post that I see crop up pretty frequently about an abandoned house, I think about what the future might hold for those dogs that have been abandoned there, and what it may look like if they could have an advocate to represent them. And then finally, I can't forget to include access to justice with facility dogs. So facility dogs have been in our courtrooms for a long time. They haven't got the media that they deserved, but they really come down to this. It is if a witness, oftentimes it's a minor, or it is a victim of a crime where they're quite vulnerable, is allowed to have a dog that is already trained and approved by the courts sit next to them in the witness box, the witness stand. It is at the discretion of the judge. It is not used all the time. It's used sparingly. And, you know, there's pros and cons to it on both sides. But for me, as an animal lover and an animal lawyer, I'm always in favor of it. And I do like that it's getting more attention now, but it has been around for a while. Okay, so now let's get to some tips, things we can do. Before I continue though, I just want to check in and see, are there any questions coming? I don't see any. Okay, so I'm going to keep talking. Okay, tips for renters. These aren't all my tips, but these are my biggest ones. And some of these I think are a little counterintuitive. I think it does not hurt to communicate with your neighbors, even the ones you don't know. And I originally had it in my slide, even the ones you don't like. I suggest that if you have pets, you should communicate with your neighbors, even the ones you don't like, even especially the ones, I underline especially the ones that you think don't like animals. I'm going to tell you a story about that, why I say that, but I believe in that 100%. I think there's nothing that can go wrong from communicating with neighbors about your pets. How do you do that? What are you doing that about? I'm going to talk about that. And I just want you to know too, I'm not suggesting that you go up and knock on everyone's doors, especially if you have a neighbor that, you know, you feel some contention. It could be a note, it could be a letter, or it could just be a wave from the sidewalk. But I think having a connection and communicating with your neighbors, even the ones that don't like animals, is super important, because you want to know if they have a concern or a potential complaint about whether your dog is barking too much before they go to your property manager or your landlord. You want to know if there's something you can do to resolve it. And you want to try to resolve it, which is my next bullet. Nip that disagreement in the bud. You really want to try to resolve it. You don't want to hire an attorney, and you don't want to go to court to fight over a disagreement about whether or not your dog is getting loose, not kept in the gate. I mean, I could just fill in the blank with any potential complaint. And some of those complaints are not necessarily warranted. That's not the point of this slide. The point of those two bullets and this slide is to suggest to you that you want to cut off disagreements and disputes at the pass. And people are passionate about their animals. They really, truly are. I didn't put that slide in this presentation, but I have it in another one. And the slide says this: disputes over issues with dogs make child custody look like child's play. So, and that is true. I used to think that family law was vicious and contentious, but really disputes over our animals are far more contentious. And so I just say that before it gets to that point, and before you find yourself throwing your hands up and trying to call an attorney, really at least try within your own safety, boundaries, try to resolve differences and build positive, open relationships as best you can. And now I just footnote that was saying, I don't want anybody to put themselves in any situation that they feel is dangerous. And I am not suggesting that if there is a neighbor that you're fearful of, that you communicate with them. That is not what I'm saying at all. I'm just suggesting that us as animal owners should consider trying to have a communication before we go there. Okay, other things that we can do, create a pet resume and have copies of health records ready. Okay, so when I say pet resume, what I really mean is, yeah, you could actually have like a resume set up, and I've seen these actually created. Obviously, it's not going to be very long, but I don't know, some of my clients I could think would create a very big resume. But what I'm saying is have a sheet already prepared with a biography for your cat or a biography for your rabbit. Talk about their date of birth, what's the date of their most recent vaccination, what vaccinations have they had. If there's been any obedience training or behavioral training, I would put that in there. I would also list pet references. List your references and then prepare your pet references for the fact. Excellent pet references for me have been prior landlords. I asked them at the time before I move out, can I use you as a pet reference? And then get their information and put that on the pet resume. Same with your health records. Get your health records printed out and ready to go so that if you need to show it, you can show that they're current to that date. And when I say health records, I don't mean like your entire veterinary file, but just enough to show that your animal is healthy. When was the last exam? Are the vaccinations up to date? Same with pet references. You don't have to have, 10 names and numbers. 2 or 3 are plenty, just like what somebody would submit for an employment application. And in the pet reference, I also suggest adding a bullet explaining what that reference can speak to. So an example would be, Mr. Smith was my landlord 3 years ago, and I rented from Mr. Smith for 3 years, and he came to the property 4 or 5 times when I was not home, but my pets were there. I don't know, something like that, just a couple sentences to give the prospective landlord or property manager an idea of why are they calling this person? What are they going to ask about? I have yet to have references actually contacted, or maybe they contacted and I just never was told, but I prepared my previous references for the fact that they would get a call, that I'm putting them down, and I hope that they'll continue to give me a positive review. And then finally, and then other examples, so other pet references could be good friends, people who've been to your house on a regular basis and can talk about the standards of health, the fact that your pets have never had any violations with humane law enforcement. There have been no attacks. It varies, obviously. You have to tailor it to your individual needs, but this is a place where you can really advocate on behalf of yourself, and you can make some inroads with a lot of our property managers and homeowners who are fearful of renting to pets. And then finally, I have to make a plug on keeping your licensing and microchip current. Yes, yes, yes. I'm going to tell you another story about why. It's not related to housing, but you need to hear it. Keep that stuff current and then add that to your pet resume and your file with the records. Here in San Diego, I think we're all on Pet Hub, so that they make it very easy. But in other states, that's not the case. The reason I say you want to keep it current is because Most people will get the license and forget that they've moved and not update the address. And then their dog gets lost and the law enforcement has a hard time finding them. That's how I get a lot of my cases. I'm not, yeah, I don't want you to ever be in that situation. And if you have been in that situation, I send you all my sympathies. The same with microchips. Microchips, most of our dogs that we adopt through rescues will come with a microchip, or we'll get a microchip at San Diego Humane Society. Many people will not update the microchip with their full contact information. I don't know why. When I think back to the time I was that person, I think I just did not think about it. I really didn't. But I will tell you that our dogs get out, our cats get out, and tags, collars are known to fall off. An individual can just remove a collar. And again, the cases I don't like to get, but I get too many of them, are fights between people in close proximity to each other who claim ownership of the same cat. Or a dog got out and somehow or another animal control wasn't able to find the original owner and somebody else adopted the dog. And then they come to me because the two parties figured out that they both have an interest in the same animal. I put that plug in there just because I don't want that to befall you. I really don't. And I really don't want those cases. Okay, so those are some of my tips. If I get some more questions tonight about other tips, I'm happy to share some of my other ones, but those are my top. Okay, tips for landlords. So landlords, if there's any landlords in this group tonight or property owners, I know I'm going to be sharing, these are some scary things that I'm suggesting here. The first one is probably the scariest for you. I really want you to reconsider your policies restricting pets. Really consider changing your no pet policy. I can give you many reasons why. One reason is that with a policy that allows for pets, you do have more of an ability to have a better dialogue with your tenant and a more honest and transparent relationship. At the end of the day, what property owners want, what my client property owners want, is to know that there aren't going to be excessive damages, to know that rent will be paid on time, and to know that they have some stability. At the end of the day, really what they want to know too is that when the tenant moves out, they're not going to be left with a unit that is thrown upside down with a lot of animal damages. I know that the better way to do that is, rather than prohibiting pets, think about loosening up that restriction. And that actually goes for a lot of restrictions. I see a lot of property owners have gone to the far extreme on one direction with restricting and prohibiting behaviors, prohibiting activities, making all these rules in an attempt to gain back control. And I get it. I get it 100%, because what used to happen was there was no control and you were losing more money than you were getting in your rent. But with allowing pets comes with the ability to also have some more control about what happens with that pet. So if there's property owners and landlords in this group, I'm willing to talk about this some more. I'll defend my position a little bit more, and I'll allow you to push back. Okay, develop procedures to review and respond to requests in advance. Now this goes to the emotional support animals, service animals, comfort animal request. Don't wait until a renter or an applicant as a renter asks you about whether or not they can have an animal and then be in freak out mode and say no, which, you may be running afoul of the laws. Develop procedures in advance, develop your questions, and have that ready so that you can respond quickly and efficiently. Use lease addendums, which would be like a second or third page to your lease that covers emotional support animals and assistance animals, meaning covers what you expect, covers documentation that you can ask for, and covers what will happen, for example, if the assistance animal or emotional support animal damages your unit. So that's something that you can do. And then finally, I'm going to just put this in here, review updates in the HUD guidelines. Now, I know this is dry stuff. It is dry. And I live and breathe in those guidelines. And I confess that after about 5 to 6 months, I have to go back and refresh my memory. So that's a big ask. That's why I put it last. But I do think that if you are a landlord or a property owner, you do owe it to your renters to be up to date on what the guidelines provide. And if you don't have the stomach for it, then that's where an attorney can come in and give you some quick guidance. Okay, so one of the other things I love to talk about are trends in the animal law world and trends in housing. Okay, so no surprise, there is a trend of landlords reconsidering no pet policies. I did not make up that recommendation on my own. I swear to you, I got that from trends that I saw from property managers and landlords. And then I confirmed that. I conferred with several of my animal law colleagues across the US and asked them what they thought about this movement. And it has been widely supported. So, the general view among attorneys that practice animal law and among property owners that are thinking more flexibly about these things is that if we ease up on these no pet policies, then some of that knee-jerk reaction of people feeling like they have to say that their pet is an emotional support animal, or they have to make that pet be an emotional support animal in order to have them with them in their unit. Hopefully that will ease up. It's not going to happen overnight, but I submit to you that this is a trend that's already happening in Europe. It's already happening in Switzerland and in Finland. So this is happening already, and I support it. Okay, emotional support animals are under greater scrutiny. Yes, 100%. So I talked about this earlier. They're under greater scrutiny obviously with the FAA. They're not letting them on flights anymore. So it's unfortunate because a lot of people benefited from having an emotional support animal on a flight with them, but now they all must go under cargo. I suspect, if I had to forecast, that we're going to see a domino into other areas. Housing, maybe not so much, but who knows? I just know that emotional support animals for sure are under greater scrutiny, and people who have a legitimate need for an emotional support animal or a comfort animal are likewise under greater scrutiny. Insurance companies have begun placing pandemic exclusions on policies. Those pandemic exclusions vary dependent on the company and dependent on the type of policy, but that is in part their attempt to recoup lost profits or recoup control that they lost. Homeowners and renters insurance, many homeowners and renters insurance policies have had breed restrictions or size restrictions. We are seeing more of those now. And we are seeing also the pandemic exclusions are added there as well. But the breed restrictions in particular are quite concerning, and I'll tell you why. I touched on it at the very beginning of the slides. The part of the problem with breed restrictions is, how do you ascertain that the breed is for sure the breed that's restricted? So for example, most restrictions will say no pit bulls. And then the next question is, who is it that is observing and making the determination that the dog in front of them is a pit bull? Most people that are on the side of that position in the point of reviewing whether that animal is a pit bull are not dog breeders, they're not dog trainers, they're not from that world. And so it's just really based on what they think. And so it's unfortunate, but it causes a lot of legal issues to come about. It causes a lot of consternation and a lot of back and forth. We also see restrictions based on size. It comes down to weight. And again, it's like usually it's a visual determination. That dog looks to be a certain weight. You know, I guess hopefully they might request some kind of proof from a veterinarian, but I have not seen that. Usually what I see is it's somebody brings their pet into the property management office, or they let the landlord see it at application time, and somebody makes a decision that the dog is, you know, 75 pounds or it's a pit bull. So that's enough about those trends. That's a trend, I think, in the negative direction, but I do know that it is also in reaction to homeowners needing control. I will say on the homeowner side and the homeowner side, property owner side, the breed restriction is important for legal reasons, because another related trend is holding landlords and property owners liable for the consequences of a pit bull attack when the landlord or property owner knew that they were renting to somebody who had a pit bull. So that's case law that's on the books. The liability for damages from an attack have been folded over and passed on to landlords and property owners. And so, you know, which came first, the chicken and the egg? Like, it's hard to say what started first, breed restrictions, the lawsuit, breed restrictions. The bottom line is that it's all happening at once. And so on the property owner side, just knowing about it is really important. And knowing about if you are renting to a renter that has pit bulls is important to know, because of the exposure to liability. Okay, puppy scams and lemon puppies. I include this here. You know, it isn't 100% a housing law trend, but I have to put it up here because this is the top trend that I see here in my practice without question. So not a week goes by that I don't get a phone call from an individual who either purchased a puppy on Craigslist, purchased a puppy from a breeder who's breeding, I say backyard or hobby breeders. Sometimes it's hard to tell what the breeding situation is, or rescued a puppy. They believe they rescued it, but they paid so much money that really, in essence, it's the purchase of a puppy. There is a lot of scams going on, there are a lot of scams going on with puppy sales, puppy whatever rescues. And live-in puppies is a related term that, it's the same as buying a lemon car, lemon auto laws. Lemon puppy is actually a law in California. It's called the Polanco-Lockyer Act law, which provides protections for consumers who have purchased a puppy that became sick. The puppy scams that we are seeing right now are resulting in people who have a parvo puppy with a very strong strength of parvo. Most of these puppies do not survive, and most of these consumers will spend between $6,000 and $15,000 on vet bills trying to save the puppy. Right now, $15,000 is my record-breaking client, and thankfully she was able to save that puppy, so that really came as a shock to me. But I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that this is something that's impacting everybody. There have been a lot of news alerts that have discussed the fact that perhaps the puppy scams and these lemon puppies and parvo puppies have increased because of COVID. A lot of people are breeding quickly to take advantage of the interest in animals now that we are working from home. And that may be, you know, I don't know why I'm seeing it more. I just know that I am. And I know that I really started seeing it more around October of last year. No, I'm sorry, that's not true. Around July of last year. So it's almost a year now. Okay, and then COVID, yeah, you know, again, most of us are at home, working from home. COVID really did bring a lot more disputes between pet owners. People walking their dogs in the street, coming across another dog in someone's front yard, and the dog's off leash and the dog bolts and attacks somebody else that's walking their dog in the street. That's a common fact scenario that I get. neighbors fighting over who owns the cat. That came up this last year. There's just more of it. There's more disputes between people who own pets and more disputes from people who don't own pets who are now more conscious of it because they're working from home. And then ultimately, the other trend that, some people are starting to talk about now is what happens when we return to work. It used to be, 8 months ago, the concern was when we return to work, all these dogs that we rescued and adopted are going to be returned to the shelter. And I ask about it at every juncture that I can. And so far, I don't hear or see evidence that that's happening. But what I do foresee happening is that all of our puppies or rescues that we brought home that are accustomed to seeing us on the day-to-day, when we start leaving the house to go to work, are possibly going to need some training. They're going to have to make that adjustment. And so maybe that training is more people training. Really, it's not dog training, but it is something that's going to come up. And how that's going to come up in the housing arena is that dogs will be barking because they're going to feel isolated and abandoned. We're going to have more accidents in the house. So maybe carpets in rentals are going to be soiled. If you're in that particular situation and you have some insight to that in advance, there's behavioral training that you can access. The Humane Society has some great sessions online that you can take about transitioning our dogs and transitioning yourselves to work from home or work from the office. And anyways, I just put that out there to give you just a heads up. And then here's some resources. Obviously, the Humane Society is a great resource. They have some great programs that provide support to people with pets. I don't even know I lost count of the different ways that they provide support because it really is a holistic approach to whatever resources an individual needs to maintain pet ownership versus having to relinquish a pet because they feel like they don't have the resources to maintain pet ownership. So I put that at the very top as a resource for any renter. Property owners, I have some other resources here that will help you learn about the laws. The San Diego County Bar Association has an animal law section, and I just want to put a plug in here. We have a Pets and Patriots panel coming up this July, and this is focusing on housing law issues and housing questions for our military personnel and veterans with pets. And then we also have the Helping Paws Foundation. Helping Paws Foundation provides resources and support to veterans and military personnel with helping them maintain pet ownership, and that is up to and including veterinary care. And then the last two, so the last two are really important to know for everybody from whichever walk of life. Social Compassion Legislation is an organization in California that is dedicated towards changing the law, upgrading the law, that all focuses on animal welfare. They have done a phenomenal amount of work on different campaigns that are all geared towards bettering our animals' welfare and helping us coexist with our animals in a better way. Again, I couldn't even list for you all the different campaigns that they've done, even in the last 6 months. But some examples include they have been working on legislation for blood banking blood for our animals. And they also have done a lot of work on prohibiting the sale of animal skins in clothing and animal testing and cosmetics. So they're a broad umbrella of animal welfare, but in the dog world and the pet world, they do so much work on behalf of our animals. And it's really good to stay in touch with their campaigns because you can see what's happening in the law. And then finally, Disability Rights California. This is a fantastic website and organization, both for tenants and property owners. They have several really fantastic downloadable handouts with FAQs and sample letters for individuals who want to make requests for emotional support animals, make the report that they have a service dog to a landlord, And conversely, they have the same for property owners, advising them and informing them of what the law requires and prohibits of their activities with tenants. And those are the end of my slides. So now I am excited to answer questions. What questions do we have? Oh, we have lots of questions.
We have a bunch in the chat. Do you want me to read them to you?
Yeah, sure. And I apologize if I talked over everybody's questions. I saw the blinking box but didn't know what to do with it.
I think this is a good time to do now. And then if you want to stop your screen share, then people could, if they wanted to, show their video while they're asking to. But I'll start with the ones in the chat.
Yeah.
Someone asks, I have a mixed dog. We think she has lab and pit bull, but we're not sure. Who or what would determine if she would fall under the pit bull restriction?
So that's a really good question. Okay, who or what? I suggest that rather than approach it from who or what gets to decide, I would take it from a different position. And that is ask the landlord, or if it's an insurance company, but hopefully it's a landlord we're talking about here. I'll answer it both ways. If it's a landlord, what I would do is, if you're not sure whether your dog is pit bull, I would report your dog as what you believe she is from where you adopted her or him or rescued him. I'm not saying lie, but oftentimes we look at a dog and we think, I've looked at dogs and thought they were pit bulls and they're really not. And so what I would do is go back to the pet resume and go back to your vet records. If there's a pushback on I think that dog's a pit bull, then I would not suggest doing a DNA test, but I maybe would go back to where if you adopted the dog, go back to the adoption site and see or the rescue organization and see how they came about that decision. I don't know. Frankly, it's so hard these days to know if a mixed dog is one thing or another. And I am really hesitant for anybody to just automatically say, yes, my dog's a pit bull because of the negative implications, especially when your dog probably has had zero history of aggression. And really that's what it comes down to. The concern is about history of aggression. And that's really how you can respond to that concern. Now, if it's an insurance company, they're gonna want like a DNA test. They're gonna want vet records. And so if that's what you're talking about, if that's where the question came from, then yeah, you're gonna have to provide some kind of proof. If you do the DNA, you're probably gonna get like a whole bunch of different percentages of different things, and that actually may not be hurtful. That could be helpful, especially if the pit bull is a smaller percentage. So it's unfortunate, but you're gonna have to get creative.
Okay, and then also, can a landlord ask for pet insurance, and what reason would that be for?
A landlord can ask for pet insurance if you have a pet. So the pet insurance is a policy that's provided usually through renter's insurance, and that covers any damages caused to the unit by your pet. If you are talking about emotional support animal, they cannot request pet insurance because that is not a pet, it's an emotional support animal. So the only time a landlord can ask for pet insurance is if you have a pet. And the pet insurance would be provided through your renter's insurance. If you have trouble finding a pet insurance policy, because that can be hard to find, then maybe consider having a conversation with them about pet rent or a non-refundable pet deposit or a refundable pet security deposit, which I think is the most ideal, which would give them the security that they need to protect against damages.
And then another one in the chat says, have you heard of any landlords having issues with renters with restricted breed dogs who are emotional support animals? Also, do you currently see a lot of weight or size restrictions for animals in rental properties?
Yes, yeah. So I see more weight and size restrictions. No, let me take that back. That is not true. I see more breed restrictions than I see weight and size restrictions. I think that both of them are problematic because a huge dog that weighs 90 pounds could be like a total baby doll and be completely docile and not cause any damages. And one of my little dogs that weighs, what's my littlest one, 8 pounds, could cause way more damage. And so in a sense, it is kind of arbitrary. The same with the breed restrictions, you know, like they'll say on the breed restrictions, it'll say pit bull, Rottweiler, Doberman. They name all the breeds that they think are the most aggressive, but they often leave out other breeds that I think are even more aggressive. So again, it is based on those restrictions often come down from legal counsel that are way off in another city, way off in corporate offices that have done some research on what they have determined to be the highest risk. So I want to make sure I'm answering the question. I think that I see for sure more breed restrictions, and I am seeing more weight restrictions added on. I have seen some, though, I will say I've seen some where they have no breed restriction and the weight restriction is really low, like 40 pounds, which is quite low in my opinion. So yeah, that's just that there again. I think if I was a tenant applying for a unit where I saw a weight restriction, I would put together my pet resume and my pet references and approach it that way.
Does anyone have questions? If you'd like to put them in the chat, you can do that now, or you can unmute yourself, or also share your video if you'd like. So it's up to you. And I do want to share that I did have a pet resume for my cat when I was renting, and it was quite fun to put together.
Yeah, yeah. Was it? Yeah, I'm going to try and I'll try and put in the handout some templates for like examples of pet resumes. And I'm also going to put in there an example of a an emotional support lease addendum, so that no matter which side you're on, you can see the questions that they asked. But I think, you know, going back to the pet insurance question, pet insurance is not as prevalent and easy to find, but what you can get for that is renter's insurance with an umbrella policy. So my advice to renters, if they are faced with pet insurance and they have trouble finding it, is to change it and ask for renter's insurance and ask for an umbrella policy that covers your pet. And your umbrella policy could be as little as $6 a month. You can pay for it annually, and that covers it. So, you know, sometimes it's nomenclature, and it's just really about, again, getting creative to match what the landlord's goal is with your goal. And, you know, vice versa. If you're the property manager, you know, you might be used to saying pet insurance, but really what you want is you just want some kind of coverage for damages. I could keep talking, so we have a few more minutes. Okay, so I'm going to keep talking unless we get more questions or somebody unmutes themselves. So I did say I was going to tell a story. So this is a really quick story. This happened to me, and this was years before I practiced animal law, and I swore back then, if you told me back then I was going to do animal law, I think I would have told you you were out of your mind. But I had 2 Labradors, and my roommate had a German short hair pointer, and we all went to work during the day. And that we had a big yard that was fenced in, and we thought, great, we can leave the dogs in the yard, everything's fine. And I had a neighbor who he was not very friendly. He was not a nice guy. And he worked nights and slept during the day. And I did not know that my dogs, especially my yellow lab Sarah, liked to bark at anything with wheels, skateboards, strollers, I don't know, you name it, shopping carts. She would bark and follow the wheels all the way around the fence, up and down, up and down. And now my other neighbors were the neighborhood watch captains, and they loved my dogs. And I said, do my dogs bark too much? No, Cheryl, your dogs are fine. We love your dogs, they're fine. And the neighbor that liked to sleep during the day, one day he yelled at me, and I wrote him off because the neighborhood watch captains kept saying, oh no, your dogs are fine, they're not a problem, ignore him. And so I tell you the story because I did not nip it in the bud, and I didn't take the complaint seriously, and I thought my dogs were not barking. And then I came to find that I had a citation from the city to the tune of $200. And then I saw the language that said that it could progressively get worse, and I could have got a misdemeanor charge for barking dogs, which is basically the nuisance ordinance. And so I took it to a hearing, and I stopped the barking. I did some dog training. I kept my dogs in the house during the day, did more walking, I had to get all the neighbors to sign a petition, and then brought that to the city, and that resolved it. But let me tell you, that was a lot of work. And after it was all done, my neighbor that seemed like a really nasty guy, at the end of it, he just said, all I really cared about was making your dogs quiet. So that's my little story about, I just don't want anyone else to go through that. That's unnecessary. Okay, I think we have a question. Let's see. Can you please expand on the requirements, rights for emotional support animal? Yes, so let me try to simplify it as much as possible. Emotional support animals are considered a tool, much like service animals. And so in the housing arena, they have very much similar rights and very much similar requirements, meaning a landlord cannot charge an additional fee for an emotional support animal. A landlord cannot charge pet rent, pet security, pet insurance, none of that. It has to be limited to pets only. Emotional support animals do require a letter from a health provider, but the landlord cannot ask any more questions than from the letter. The letter should only say, this person needs an emotional support animal. I have prescribed it, and this person is under my treatment. That's it. No discussion of medical diagnosis, no disclosure of private health information. That's it. So if you are a tenant, that is the basics of it. As a landlord, requirements and rights for emotional support animals are that the tenant is responsible for any damages caused by the animal, but they cannot be charged any additional rent for that, and they cannot be penalized for that. And the emotional support animal can be brought in at any time during the tenancy. So unless there's a more specific question, that's the basics of it. Okay, the next question is, a dog came on my property and killed my chicken. Oh my God, I'm sorry, read this. A dog came on my property and killed my chicken. I caught the dog and called the Humane Society, and they said I had to return the dog to the owner because animals are considered property and you don't own it. Are pets considered property? Yes, okay, yes. I love this question. Thank you for asking that, Kathy. So pets are still considered property, but they are now becoming quasi-property. They're being elevated to quasi-status under the law. That means that they have the benefits of property causes of action, meaning, yes, like in your example, you did have to return the dog because it was not your property. But they are also elevated in a certain extent because our courts are now recognizing them. For example, in divorce court, many family law judges are including them in custody and visitation arrangements. In estate planning and probate court, same thing. But in your scenario, just to speak to when a dog comes onto someone else's property and causes damage, it is very similar to when you're driving your car and you're pulling out of the driveway and you back into someone else's car. Same thing. The analysis applies the same way. The claims for action and relief that you have from the court are identical. But just like with your dog situation, if somebody backed in with their car, you can't keep their car as evidence of the accident. You have to allow them to take the car back home. Now you can take pictures of the car, but you can't keep their car on your property. So that's kind of the way I explain it to my clients. You know, often courts and case law will say that what they're saying now is our pets are not like dishwashers. Our pets are not like a lawnmower, but they kind of are in some respects. So the other thing I want to tell everybody here tonight is that just like with the car analogy, we are responsible 100% for the damages caused by our animals. And there is no, so it's called strict liability. And what it means is that there's no exception, there's no defense. Oftentimes I'll hear defenses like, well, I keep my dog on leash all the time and my fence is in really good repair, but somebody left the fence open. That doesn't matter. Does not matter. There's no excuse. Well, there's an excuse, but you're still liable for the value of the damages that you cause. You need to make the other person whole. So we have a few more minutes if somebody wants to ask. Oh, here we go. Yes, here we have a follow-up. We have a follow-up to the emotional support question. Can tenants be allowed more than one emotional support animal per housing unit? I love that you asked this question. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Yes, this is a good one. Yes, you can have more than one emotional support animal. This is established in case law. It is an unknown part of the law, but it is true. So it is established that an individual's disability can require more than one emotional support or assistance animal. And that can be going back to Kathy's chickens qualify as emotional support animals. And I have clients with chickens, and I've come to learn, I've come from the dog world, so no surprise I never had a chicken. But now that I know more about chickens, I would love one. They're very smart. They're smart, they love to cuddle. So yeah, anyways, yeah, and I collect news alerts on I have all these news alerts, so I collect stories on different animals. But there was a recent story about a woman with her emotional support chickens, like multiple chickens. So it's a real thing. Okay, Amy has a question. I always say my husky is the emotional support animal to my emotional support animal who is a German Shepherd. Oh my gosh, that's so cute. Well, Amy, that's really cute. And I'm glad that you mentioned that, because actually I have a case where I have a dog that was a signal dog to another dog. So signal dog is another way of saying, you know, like a guide dog. So I had a blind dog that had another dog that was the seeing eye dog for the blind dog. And so that's a real thing that happened. And then, yeah, you know, unfortunately our animals don't require emotional support under the law, but I agree with you that my two dogs provide each other with emotional support. We have a few more questions. Thank you, Amy, for that question or that share. Any other questions about, I'm trying to think of anything else I can add in that's like unheard of rarities. Anything is there anything I didn't talk about that when you knew you were going to attend tonight, you wanted to hear from me? Wow, I did a fantastic job. I'm just going to say I did it. I did a great job. Okay. Well, like I said, oh, thank you, Amy. Amy said you did a fantastic job. Thank you, Amy. So like I said at the beginning, I'm going to provide handouts that will be distributed to you. I will include the emotional support chicken story. I'm gonna go through all of my materials and call together things that I touched on today, and I'm gonna include in the really boring housing and urban development FAQs. You just have to see it. But you know, I encourage you to reach out to me if you have questions, and let me know that you attended this webinar, and I'm more than happy to answer additional questions about this stuff. And hopefully you don't need to hire me. That's really what I want to say too. So thank you for your participation and your attendance tonight. And I really appreciate, I just appreciate doing this. This was fun for me.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. That was so informative. And just a reminder to everybody else too, I will be sending the recording. So if you wanted to listen to what Cheryl had said about any of those topics as well, you can revisit that with the recording as well. So thank you very much for sharing all of your knowledge with us. And we really appreciate it. I hope everybody has a wonderful evening. If anyone thinks of follow-up questions, you're always welcome to send them to me too, and I can pass them along. All right, thank you very much.
Good night, everybody.